Hey everybody, welcome to Hit Rewind. This episode we're discussing the comic book events of 1996. Pardon my stumble. Hey, not that many events, is there, John?
Oh God. Well, okay. I won't. I don't know which one we want to start with first, but I will say this: Marvel does. I don't have a whole lot to talk about Marvel because basically one thing took over Marvel that whole year.
Well,
So
if you think about it, this is almost the near collapse of the whole industry. I would say 97 might be the pits because I think 97 is when Marvel files for bankruptcy and then they go down to like 8 titles. Am I wrong?
pretty much, I will say this: this is the year that I stopped reading comics. Like, I have a few issues of Spider-Man from this, or had a few issues. I don't think I even have those anymore, but I had stuff from this year that I had collected, and then it just stops, and I had lost my interest in what Marvel and everybody had to offer. So it was, I've read this stuff not in the recent years and whatnot, and I think I did pick a good time to stop reading.
Yeah. Um, I think I told you I basically stopped. So I stopped buying them in '92. But my uncle had a business. Even as a teenager, he would go around buying comic books, whatever he thought would be rare. But he got burned a lot because it was the whole speculation market. But I was still reading his stuff at his house. So I was still reading through '93. I want to say some '94. And then I just dropped off. And then I want to say it was summer of '96. A small comic book shop opened in someone's garage near where I lived. And I started pilfering through the old stuff. I was into Savage Dragon still. So I started picking that up. And then through that, I started getting the spin offs. And then I started going like, hey, what else does Image have going on? So I started digging through a lot of their stuff. I was not reading anything from Marvel, anything from DC. It would probably be another 2-3 years before I picked up anything from either one of those guys. Though I did have a friend who was reading X-Men all the time, so I read the whole Age of Apocalypse.
Yeah, and that's probably like the last really good event that Marvel put out for a good while.
Yeah. So, as usual, we start off with Marvel.
All right. Well, here's one that's going to cross over because this is the highlight of '96 for me at the very least. I don't know if you have anything that you would call a highlight, but DC versus Marvel happened. It was written by Ron Mars and Peter David, two of the most prolific writers at the time for both companies. And art by Dan Jurgens and Claudio Castellini. And basically, it was various characters from the Marvel and DC comics are brought together by these two godlike brothers that personify the two companies in order to basically see which ones have the best champions. Now, out of the 11 fights that happened during the story, 6 were decided by the creative team, but then the 5 others were actually decided through reader votes.
That's pretty cool. At least, yeah, you have some sort of. I feel like it all should have been reader decided.
It should have, but then again, well, the fights that were decided by the company was with Namor versus Aquaman, where Aquaman won. Elektra versus Catwoman, where Elektra won.
Oh.
Flash versus Quicksilver, Flash wins.
Yeah, that's a given.
Robin versus Jubilee, where Robin wins, which is also a given. Shazam versus Thor, and Thor wins. Well, actually, Captain Marvel at the time, where Thor wins. And Silver Surfer versus Green Lantern, where Silver Surfer wins.
Okay.
Which it makes sense.
Yeah,
Green Lantern's not going to be the Silver Surfer.
Green Lantern isn't the Green Lantern that we know now because Kyle is still like pretty new to the whole thing. So yeah, Silver Surfer's going to kick his ass.
Yeah, and with those 6 fights, 3 and 3 wins. So you have the idea is that the company picks a balance, and it's up to the readers to effectively choose who's going to win in this contest. So, and those fights would have been you had Superman versus the Hulk, and Superman won that. Ben Reilly Spider-Man versus Superboy, and Spider-Man wins. Batman versus Captain America, which went to Batman. Wolverine versus Lobo, where Wolvie wins. And Storm versus Wonder Woman, where Storm wins.
Yeah. What?
Yeah, and even though at that point Wonder Woman had gotten Thor's hammer.
Wow, that's amazing because I didn't expect the DC to say, yeah, that's cool with us. Because Storm's always been kind of like lower popular, level.
Well, but that's the thing is, even though the fights basically actually go into Marvel's favor, basically the way the story is done is that the brothers came up with a compromise, and they merged the two realities.
Okay.
And that became the Amalgam Comics.
Yeah. Is this where the seeds of JSA versus the Avengers is planted? I feel like it's somewhere around this way they start talking about it.
I think so because that's a hell of a crossover too. But it's like, yeah, and the idea is, I mean, we had Marvel and DC crossovers, before. Like, I think Superman and Peter Parker, Spider-Man crossed over before. I'm sure there's some Batman.
Yeah. Well, there was the Teen Titans and the X-Men special.
Yeah, that too. And it's like, but every time I think about these crossovers, it always goes to the Dark Horse ones where it was Batman versus Alien, Superman versus Alien, Batman and Superman versus Alien versus Predator.
Batman's Judge Dredd and Batman and Tarzan. Dark Horse would license that shit out like crazy just to get their name out.
But effectively, the Amalgam Comics ran for like a month or so. I think there was only a single issue of any of these. But you had.
Go ahead, sorry.
But it came up to characters like the Super Soldier, which was Captain America and Superman. Darkclaw, which is Batman and Wolverine. Spider-Boy. Take a fucking wild guess who they threw together for that one. Doctor Strange Fate. And, of course, the one that makes the absolute most sense was the X-Patrol. Because if you're going to take the two characters that are effectively the exact same comic from both sides, Doom Patrol and X-Men, what the hell are we doing?
Yeah, that is strange, though, but it is like an interesting pair-up. It's not an obvious, like, from sales point, but yeah, that works for me.
There was also, and this, I never read this one. I read some of these because they had them all. I think there's 2 volumes of it that were all condensed together, so you could actually read the Amalgam Comics. I've read some of them because of that, but I think the second volume I didn't see because I've never read Magneto and the Magnet Men.
That's terrible.
Which was, Magneto with the Metal Men, and I know of the Metal Men existence and all that stuff, but I don't think I've ever read anything with those characters.
I've seen them like as guests in a couple comics, and it just doesn't work for me. I don't care. Yeah, it's like aren't they like Metamorpho adjacent in kind
a way?
of, yeah. They're just flexible. They're all basically the same thing. There's different strengths based on what metal they are. They're the kind of characters like Sea Devils that pop up every 10 years in like some sort of mini-series, and everybody goes, nope. Yeah, it doesn't work.
But so eventually the two brothers end up restoring their separate universes, and they congratulate each other on, each other's characters and blah, blah, blah. It's actually a better crossover than it really has any right to be, because it is the equivalent of like Secret Wars, where we're going to get our toys and we're just going to bash them together until and see what happens. But it's the matches. Some of them are genuinely, they're not extensively long fights, but they're actually in some cases really well thought out. Like the Batman Captain America fight is actually a really well construed 2-page. Like I think each battle is maybe 2 pages. It's actually a well thought out conflict because it's effectively 2 characters that 100% know that they are being, no matter what they do, they're screwed. They definitely know they have no animosity towards each other, and they're both very good tacticians. and it's literally just random chance that knocks Captain America out. But like the Robin Jubilee fight, which is incredibly a stupid idea to have a fight because, well, it's like Jubilee has powers, sure, but this is Tim Drake. Tim Drake's going to beat the crap out of, well, he's not going to beat the crap out of Jubilee. He's going to beat Jubilee in any form of match because he's the most resourceful, he truly is Batman, just as a kid.
Right.
And Jubilee isn't Kitty Pryde. She's just Jubilee.
She's sassy.
But it's a cute fight because they're flirting the entire time.
Oh.
and she's upset that she lost, but she's very good with it because the way you can kind of read it is, I think Jubilee's into bondage.
Ooh. Wait, no, the teenagers. That's all right.
Yeah, she's discovering some things about herself. I'm adding a lot of context to that story. I'll say this though: the worst fight in there is actually the Wolverine Lobo one, because it's literally done off screen.
Oh, that's lame.
Wolverine shows up at a bar that Lobo's at. They go behind the bar. You just kind of see like a couple of arms, for each one. They're saying catchphrases, and then Wolverine just gets up and lights up a stogie, and that's it. And you're kind of going, wow, that's some bullshit.
Yeah, that's lame. Especially when it's not a budgetary reason. Just draw the damn thing.
Yeah, it's out of any of those fights, that would be the one I would want to see, and I think I would say that is definitely a conscious decision. It's kind of like in that 2016-2014 Godzilla film where the first big fight of the film with Godzilla, you don't see it because they want to build up your anticipation, but you're not building up anything at this one.
Yeah.
You're giving us blue balls. What the hell?
It's so lame. Yeah, I never read it, so I never saw any of this. I don't even know if I even read any of the Amalgam stuff. I was completely out of the whole thing during this time.
Yeah, I've only of that series, I only owned like 2 of the DC versus Marvel actual issues, and like I said, then I read the Amalgam stuff as years later as a collection.
Yeah. For my world, it was basically just independent comics, if anything. I think it's funny is if you look at the mid-90s are real, like, if there's any comic book movies, it's almost all independent stuff. Because, like 96, literally the only movie based on a comic book. Can you fucking believe this? I'm saying these words. Only one movie that year.
Barbed Wire, wasn't it?
Yeah, Barbed Wire. That was it. It's like so pathetic. Like a $15 million. That wouldn't even buy you one of the actors of the Marvel Universe now $15 million.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah, and then, of course, what was it? Gramercy put all their money on that instead of Mystery Science Theater 3000. At the time, I was mad. I was mad for a long time. I was like, it could have been a big hit. No. Let's not delude ourselves. Mystery Science Theater 3000, the movie, was never going to be a hit. At best, maybe it made a few $1 million. But, come on. It was a movie that was chopped up over and over, reshot twice. And when it came out in theaters, it was only 72 minutes long. I was pissed. So...
Yeah.
But still better than Barbed Wire.
This is true. Although Barbed Wire is just Casablanca, so...
Yeah. With Mad Max infused into it. So, yeah, I was thinking, like, 94 is, like, the heyday of Dark Horse Comics, because they had The Mask and Time Cop, and I feel like there's another one in there. Well, The Shadow, sort of, because at the time they had the license. But, yeah, it's so funny, because for a little bit there, DC and Marvel... They weren't making movies. All we had was like maybe the Batman movies and Steel.
Well, and like I said, with this little crossover, you are kind of seeing these two companies that are in a tough time actually, really sitting there and going, hey, let's have fun and poke fun at the fact that we are competition.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, isn't even on TV, I think all we had was like the last season of Lois and Clark. It's so strange because all we have is nonstop comic book stuff. I don't even know if we even had. Do we even have the animated X-Men series at this point?
Let's see. It was 92.
I want to say maybe the last season of it. The Tick.
It might have been like the final season.
Yeah, I think the Tick was still going. Yeah, it was a weird time to have hardly anything. Would you count Freakazoid though? Freakazoid seems like it wasn't based on comic book, but it's definitely in that world. All right, so over in comic books, seriously, it's not much better in DC. So,
all right, well, I do have a couple more.
Okay. Oh, you're not done. I'm sorry.
Yeah. If you want to jump over to DC, we can do that, and I'll come back.
No, you're good. I thought you were done. I thought you said you only had one thing to talk about.
No. Because the Clone Saga is trudging on. Okay, technically the Clone Saga ended in '95 with Peter Parker retiring, and he's going to enjoy life with pregnant Mary Jane, and they had they had their own little mini series and shit. But you get the Ben Reilly's now Spider-Man, so we get the series Web of Spider-Man ends and replaced with the Sensational Spider-Man. In issue 0, introduces the new status quo where he's blonde, he's got the new suit, he's working at a coffee shop, and there's a female Dr. Octopus, because why the fuck not?
Right.
And you have Kane, who's the failed Peter Parker clone who was killed, then resurrected, because god damn it, we can't let anyone be dead. We have to keep having fucking clones. There's also, let's see, they find the body of the original Spider-Man clone, so, oh no, we had determined that Peter Parker was the clone of Spider-Man. Now we found the clone. What the hell's going on?
Yeah.
And, it's like, so Peter and MJ have returned from Portland, and then Peter loses his spider powers, but now that the Parkers are back in the books, Peter's got to get his powers back after almost dying because
reasons, sales.
Characters become cyborgs for no real reason, like
what?
The Bob Enforcer Hammerhead and the Hobgoblin. Let's see. Yeah, Peter dies, but then gets better. Onslaught, which we'll talk about after this, happens for like 2 issues. Mary Jane gets poisoned, is forced into labor, and is told that the baby's stillborn, but the baby's actually kidnapped. And then we all discover the person who's been masterminding this whole thing, because Jesus fucking Christ, this storyline has gone on for... Technically, this story has gone on for 12 years now.
Oh, my goodness.
Because, okay...
Yeah, you started back in the 70s when it first... Yeah.
Yeah, well, no. This thing, because all these comics have been, it's 4 main titles. And this thing's been running for like 2 to 3 years, so about 3 years or so.
Uh-huh.
Think about it. 3 years, but each comic book, there's 4 separate comics. This is 12 years worth of stories now, if you're running in a single issue.
Got it.
So, Norman Osborn, who's been dead for 20 years at this point, has now been retconned to be alive and has been masterminding everything.
I was impaled. I got better.
Yeah. And everything we know is a lie, and then Ben dies, Peter has gained his powers back, becomes Spider-Man, beats the shit out of Osborn. And this thing really, there is a condensed version of the storyline that is better, but nothing about this is good. And the Parker baby plotline is dropped until 98, where there's a story called The Final Chapter, and, oh wait, no it wasn't. Communism was just a red herring. Literally, the kidnapped baby just vanishes.
And it becomes, what was it, got the MC2 or something like that, where we got Spider-Girl a couple years later.
Yeah, we talked about that, where it became the Spider-Girl series. But yeah, to this point I'm talking modern day comic books, no one has ever mentioned that fucking baby.
Huh.
That baby has disappeared. People have forgotten about it. It is as dead as Peter and MJ's marriage in... goddamn. Anyway, yeah. But a couple quick things before we'll talk about the big event from Marvel in general. There was the further adventures of Cyclops and Phoenix, which basically Scott and Jean travel back in time to Victorian London, kind of like what they did in the other one. They go into someone else's body and live their lives out there. But they run afoul of Nathaniel Essex, who would become the evil mutant character Mr. Sinister.
I was wondering if that was his name.
And basically, it's a shitty series. It's got terrible art. There's really not a whole lot going for it, aside from you do get if you really like Mr. Sinister, this is his backstory. And it is actually, in that regard, it's interesting, but it's badly written. Apocalypse is in it because, of course, he is. It's a muddled mess, but if you really want to learn more about that character, this is one of the things that you would really want to read. But I pity your soul.
I can't believe we just talked about 2 stupid stories in the Marvel Universe. That's how pathetic the year was.
Oh, we got one more. Okay, Wolverine number 100 and kind of onward. Cable's shitty son Tyler, or his shitty adopted son, or his shitty adopted nephew, depending on who's writing the story, who's been in the Cable comics for some time, is going by this moniker Genesis at this point, and decides he's the heir of Apocalypse because fuck it. It's let's just go with it. He kidnaps Wolverine and attempts to rebond him with adamantium because it's been years now at this point. So Logan does get his metal bones and claws back, and then his healing factor, which had been waning, gets kicked into overdrive, and he loses his nose and goes feral.
No, I remember this. It was so stupid. Why does his nose fall off?
Because that's what happens if you turn feral in the Marvel Universe.
Sure.
The same thing happened to Wild Child.
Okay.
It's why? But okay, Onslaught is the big event, and what's kind of nice about this event is, unless you were following following the X-Men or like reading Wizard magazine.
Oh god, I miss Wizard magazine. I was just thinking about it this morning.
You might actually find yourself being totally 100% blindsided by this event, because it's been this back in I think we talked about this in '93. We were talking about Fatal Attractions, and I said that storyline would have repercussions. And basically, this is where we've gotten to. After the Age of Apocalypse, they had like a little one-shot thing that's supposed to reestablish things. And during it, we're starting to see this uptick in violence against mutants. And so we're kind of getting this idea that Charles Xavier's dream is kind of, his failing, and he's really taking it badly. He's been trying really hard, and he effectively kind of gets this little gremlin on his shoulder that starts kind of sinking its claws into him, and Charles Xavier breaks bad, basically. We've been having this long-running mystery since Bishop, the mutant from the future, showed up about someone betrays the X-Men and kills them and wipes them out. It's Charles, because he's been that's where it kind of pussied out. He was literally supposed to have gone 100% dark. He was supposed to be a villain in this point.
Yeah, they do this all the time. They chicken out all the time, yeah.
Yeah, he's supposed to kill the X-Men. He's supposed to, when he wipes Magneto's mind in Fatal Attractions, part of Magneto's darkness enters his mind and starts creating this alternate personality called Onslaught. And it's left a mystery for a decent amount of time in the storyline, until all of a sudden we get to the point where he's called all the X-Men to him, and he reveals, that he is the mastermind behind, some of these things going on. Oh no, we have to stop him. I blow up the mansion, because when does the X-Mansion not get blown up?
Right.
Xavier's taken over bits and pieces, around the world. He's created a group of super sentinels that he throws out into New York. So yeah, if you're reading the Punisher, all of a sudden Sentinels attack and blow the shit out of a shield carrier, and it's kind of like, what the fuck? Again, Spider-Man, all of a sudden he's doing his little web swing thing. Sentinels attack. Yeah, like I said, if you weren't actually reading X-Men or something, all of a sudden
you'd be
shit's
very, very
going down.
confused. Yeah.
But basically, all the heroes get together. One thing I do have to say is he's also trying to get X-Man, Nate Gray from the Age of Apocalypse, and Franklin Richards, the godlike being that exists, little moppet of Reed Richards and Sue Storm, their little child who's effectively a god on Earth. He's trying to get them under his sway, and because I really need to mention that before I go any further. Avengers, X-Men, Iron Man, Fantastic Four, all these people get together with the X-Men. They fight Onslaught over Manhattan. And I actually had a whole bunch of notes as to what these characters were up to. I don't know if I want to go into it, because we've actually gone longer than I expected. Okay, quick things. Thor was cast out of Asgard and had just recently gotten back into good graces. Tony Stark was discovered to be a sleeper agent programmed by Kang the Conqueror. The Avengers went back in time, got his teenage version, who's now currently Iron Man. Captain America was accused of treason and just recently saved the president's life, so he's no longer a man without a country. And that's about it. Because fuck the Avengers. Fuck the Fantastic Four. They were doing their bullshit.
It really was the pits of the Marvel Universe, seriously. It was embarrassing.
Yeah, so all these people get together, they're fighting it, and eventually they destroy Onslaught, and it's at the cost of a good amount of heroes' lives. I mean, like I said, it's most of the Avengers, Iron Man, Fantastic Four, Captain America. A lot of these people are wiped out. And, now Xavier, it's been shown that Xavier's taken over by a parasite because, he's Hal Jordan. And Onslaught is Parallax because we don't want to actually make our hero an actual villain.
Yeah.
So, but everyone's now seen Xavier's, darkest side exposed to the world, and he is now in serious trouble. All these people are dead. Mutants are now hated more. Black Widow shudders the Avengers, and we're done. And a lot of comics come to an end. Now, what I mean is, they were actually all these comics were rebooted, and they now exist in a different reality that was going to have new continuity and stuff, because welcome to Heroes Reborn.
Yeah, where they gave it over to the artists.
Oh, well, it was given over to Jim Lee's Wildstorm Productions and Rob Liefeld's Extreme Studios.
Barf!
Yeah, so Wildstorm got Fantastic Four and Iron Man. Liefeld had Cap and the Avengers. And this is where that picture of that really horribly proportioned Captain America comes from. Not from the actual comic, but from promotional material.
Yeah.
Rob Liefeld thought people would want to read a Captain America comic with that huge-chested, tiny, lower-bodied Cap. Thankfully, his time with Captain America lasts 6 issues, and he was booted from all the books that they were...
But do you remember, didn't he even have like a Captain America ripoff that he got sued for, like the Heroic Shield or something stupid? The Fighting American or something?
It basically, everything that Liefeld does is a ripoff of someone else's work.
Yeah.
Even though he likes to claim that Deadpool is an original creation, we all know that it's a reskin of Deathstroke.
Well, Cable. Do you mean Cable or Deadpool?
No, Deadpool. Well, Deadpool is Deathstroke.
Well, both of them kind of feel like Deathstroke now that I think about it. the look of Deadpool, but the attitude of Deathstroke goes into Cable.
Yeah, I guess, but even then, he's Wade Wilson as opposed to Slade Wilson.
Oh yeah, fuck, I never thought of that. Huh.
Yeah, and Life would love to pretend that he didn't do that, even though, but effectively, this whole thing runs only a year's time. We'll talk about it ending in the next episode of this, but this is all, it turns out, a pocket universe created by Franklin Richards because they realized how shitty all these comics were, and they needed a way to get them back. But we'll get into that stuff in the next show. But yeah, that was Marvel. I even dug deep to try and actually get some good stuff out of it, and no.
Yeah. My turn?
Your turn.
Okay, so things are starting to look up over at DC. It's not great, but it's better. So, we talked about, I think, earlier about the Justice League, where after Superman, there's the whole Keith Giffen, DeMatteis, I can't remember who the artist was, the run, the whole New Beginnings of JLA that started like in 86, 87. And, that had a big fan following, but people said it lacked, like, urgency and danger. So then they changed things up, and they, the whole creative team moved around. I think Dan Jurgens took over. And then we had the whole Doomsday event, and that was kind of like the peak of that era of Justice League, where things really could be, pretty deadly. And then Wonder Woman had taken over, and slowly the interest in sales and the team just kept getting weirder and weirder. I think like Tasmanian Devil was on there or something like that, and the Ray. It wasn't like the Elite, and nor was it funny anymore. Because that was kind of the joy of the early part of the series, is that it was just a bunch of oddballs, but that it was funny. So I think Justice League, it needed the slate cleaned. And I gotta tell you, oh my God, Grant Morrison just said, hey, we're going with the big seven. Of course, they didn't have, Barry and Hal, but they had Wally and Kyle. And oddly enough, threw in, the Plastic Man. He's the one oddball choice, and it really works.
Well, yeah. Well, it's also because Plastic Man is a fun character. Because DC has effectively two characters that are literally the same one, and it's Plastic Man and Elongated Man.
Right. But
Elongated Man is more of a detective character, whereas Plastic Man is just fun.
Well, isn't that Fawcett Comics? Like, they bought, maybe it wasn't Fawcett. I know they got Shazam, Captain Marvel from them, but I think they also owned Plastic Man, and I just feel like DC was like, well, we bought this, but what the hell do we do with it? Besides that cartoon, it basically got tossed away.
I think that sounds about right. So, yeah, it was definitely an acquisition that they had.
And I had a problem with Howard Porter's art in the beginning. And sometimes I still think it's a really weird choice of how he draws people. I think a lot of it is the inking. I think it's just too dark and heavy. But then there's some stuff that he draws that's so fucking jaw-dropping and really captures the action that you have in your, of what it should be. So I'm always kind of torn on his artwork. But
I'm trying to think if I've read any of this run or not.
I thought we did a whole episode about this, like the first part.
It's possible.
Okay.
I'm trying to remember, but yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, we did.
And Morrison is just this side of too complicated when it comes to his big, heady plots. So it's really like dense and layered, and these huge ideas that you never thought of, and yet somehow it's palatable to a general audience, which, some writers can get so caught up in their own ideas that you don't know what the fuck they're talking about. But I think he did a really genius way of doing it. My favorite one is, though, when they finally meet Prometheus, and he has all the programming of how to take down every single member of the Justice League, and they want to know how it was possible, and then he's like, Batman's like, well, he took it from me. And they're like, why do you have plans on taking us all down? I think they kicked him out for a while. Like, they had serious trust issues with him.
Yeah. yeah. I'm still trying to think. It's like because I do get Morrison and someone else confused occasionally when I have to think about this.
Well, Warren Ellis is the guy I would say is probably closest in his style.
Yeah, yeah, and it's things like Morrison. I think is the kind of guy who gets in his way a lot because, yeah, you can sit there and go like he's written some amazing work, and then he turns around and writes the most, we'll say, batshit insane things that you can't follow.
Yeah. Yeah, and then I remember it ran really well for like 70 issues, and he ended it with World War III. He always had like a 5-year run planned. And then it just, again, Justice League lost its steam. This is what they do all the time now, is they'll get a big writer with a huge idea who can only carry it for a little while. Morrison probably had the longest run of anybody, though. But like, they had Brad Metzler for like 2 years and then just petered out. Jeff Jones, and then it petered out. They're just constantly doing this now. But remember back in the day that they would just change creative teams, but they wouldn't reboot the series. This is a new era. That's it.
Yeah, DC was very good at constantly rebooting everything every 20 years or so.
Yeah, but now it's like every other year. It's irritating. But over with Hitman launches, which I think debuted in Detective Comics as like just a guest character that everybody fell in love with, and Garth Ennis basically hits the ground running. Has he done Preacher yet?
At this point, I think so.
Okay.
I think Ennis had I'm going to look him up at the moment.
Because, he was for a long time, he was a UK writer. I think he wrote like for 2000 AD. And this is kind of like his American breakout. Yes, Preacher, if it already was out, but it's still a Vertigo title that wasn't a mainstream thing. This is him doing the best he can with the main.
Well, that's the thing. Like this came from that Bloodlines crossover event.
That's right. What was Hitman's power anyway? Just he was amazing shot or what?
Oh no, he had like his eyes. He had X-ray vision or something like that.
Oh, okay. Why did they kill him off after like 6 years? I never understood. Like such a popular. Well, he wasn't like a top 10 by any means, but he had a strong cult following, and they just killed his character off. Is that a deal that Enos had with him? Like, does he own?
I think that was always the idea. Was he wanted this character? I think he was given creative control over him, and he had his own story planned out.
Yeah. Okay, well, it's so strange because DC, goes back on deals all the time. I mean, for fuck's sake, the Watchmen are in our normal universe now.
But the problem, the thing with Hitman is it would very easily, under anyone else, just become generic Punisher.
I guess, yeah. It's just so interesting, though, because, they bought Wildstorm, in 98, 99. They're like, oh, it'll always be its own separate thing, but then all of a sudden, like, well, you know what, we gotta incorporate this, too. So it's odd.
He has been writing Preacher for a little bit at this point.
Okay. Yeah, it was a darkly comedic, kind of like a sidestep to the whole DC universe. It's in it, but it barely touched, what was going on in that world.
It's predominantly he's a Batman adjacent character, and Batman does pop up. I think Superman does at one point.
Yeah, basically though, it's just him taking on odd jobs or whatever, taking low level mobsters down and stuff like that.
And it has was it Section 6? I think was the quote unquote superhero team in it, filled with like the perverts and drunks and
was Guy Gardner part of this team?
No, it did have I think it's Six Pack was the leader of it, and he was just a drunk. He was just a drunk bum.
All right.
Who got a statue? Who saved the world? Who actually has, as much as Garth Ennis is a messed up human being, he writes some twisted, really just off the wall, you just puppy head tilt while you read this stuff.
Yeah. I'm never gonna forget encountering the hillbillies in Preacher where he says, I'm gonna fuck a fish. I think he did fuck a fish. I think he had one in his hand with his mouth open.
but you get to this point where it's you have Dog Welder is one of the characters. Guess what he does?
I don't want to know. He welds dogs together.
Yeah, welds dogs to people.
Oh, okay.
But he ends up taking these characters that he's basically just making he's doing commentary on superheroes, and he actually gives this drunk character a end that you genuinely will tear up over.
Wow.
Kind of like, because as messed up as he is, he does understand how to push all the right buttons, but also how to craft really, really well thought out narrative, even though he loves to just push every gross button he can while getting there.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I'm also just kind of going, and he also loves to put Nazis in everything.
Yeah.
Those are his favorite villains.
Yeah. Well, they're the best villains of all time, I guess. Nothing wrong with punching a Nazi. Over in the Batman universe again. But this was more direct. Nightwing finally gets his own spinoff. His character needed to break away from the Titans for Pete's sake. And this is the point where the whole Teen Titans, remember they got rebooted? And it was a super young Adam. And it was like a whole new team because everybody had basically aged out. And Nightwing's like, okay, well, I'm cutting off my hair, for one. That mullet sucked. I'm changing my costume, make it look more streamlined. And I got my own city, Bloodhaven.
Yeah, I will say, that is still the worst name, like, most on-the-nose, terrible name that they could have done it. And yet, the Nightwing series is really good, and that city is a very compelling stand-in for Gotham.
Yeah, it's a lower, like, what do you want to say? It's nowhere nearly as historical, and it's much more blue collar. It's almost like what is it's like Detroit so Gotham is supposed to be Chicago, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or thereabouts, yeah.
Yeah, so it's supposed to be Chicago, and that's the closest thing I think of is maybe Bloodhaven is Detroit, but they're much closer, aren't they? Like, it feels like Bloodhaven's only like an hour away from Gotham. At best.
Yeah, it seemed, well, I would assume so. Let's state it like that, because geography in the DC universe has never made sense.
Well, it's always trying to be parallel to something that actually exists, but it gives them the freedom to do things like blow up Coast City, which I think is San Diego, maybe? Which is weird because then they introduced, like 20 years ago, they started saying, oh, there is a real San Diego. I'm like, whoa, what? You can't start just talking about New York when we have Metropolis. What?
Yeah, that's the problem. Is it's like, well, technically Metropolis, I think, is, or at least originally, was supposed to be Vancouver.
Really?
Because if I remember right, I think Simon and Schuster were actually from Canada, I think. If I'm remembering things, but I seem to remember, reading that was the original inspiration. It was not actually New York, but it was like Vancouver.
Wait, did you say Simon and Schuster, like the company?
No,
Siegel.
Yes, yeah. Siegel and Schuster.
I forgot where it was. Oh yeah, so I love Nightwing. At first, the art was jarring, just like Howard Porter. The Scott McDaniels art is very interesting because it's very stylized, but not in the way Image Comics was stylizing. This is what I think was happening at DC. They saw what Marvel was constantly trying to catch up and replicate what Image was doing. And DC said, okay, we tried this too. Like Extreme Justice is clearly an Image influence kind of thing. And then I said, fuck this. Let's take more influence from other styles. Like, it's working with our Vertigo line, that is a very unique look that doesn't look like Image. It's not like rippling muscles and thousands of pockets and all these like armor bullshit. And it's streamlined and it's stylized, but in a very unique way. Even some of the coloring patterns that like Mike Mignola would use with some of his artwork is kind of brought over to Nightwing. Not the same drawing style, but the color and the shading. But they introduced some like really interesting, like one of my favorite, I can't remember his name, and I used to be a hardcore reader of this, but there was a guy who got his neck broke by Blockbuster and somehow didn't die. Soames, I think is his name. And that's what he is. He is now just a dude that walks backwards. His neck is literally twisted all the way around. He survived. That's such a weird ass fucking thing to do.
Weird.
Yeah, and then Blockbuster is no longer like a Solomon Grundy knockoff, like a dumbass Hulk kind of character. He did a deal with Neuron during Underworld Unleashed where he got his intelligence back, and now he's like Kingpin. And I read this probably for 120 issues or so until Chuck Dixon walked away, and Bruce Jones took over. And then it got dark and weird, and it just wasn't my jam, and so I kind of just skipped out. And it's never been the same. They've tried to reboot it. It's not the right voice.
To go back to what I was saying, Schuster was Canadian. He modeled the skyline on Toronto.
Oh, okay. Good to know. I didn't know that. I had no idea.
And very early on, Clark Kent was working for the Daily Star, which was modeled after the Toronto Star.
And speaking of Superman, we have the relaunch of Supergirl. I think this is the first time that she's had a series since, I want to say the early 80s at best. And she's always a character that nobody can really figure out. It's like the way it was with Aquaman forever, or Hawkman, where it's just like, we have this idea, but it just doesn't work for very long, and it burns itself out. I think Peter David had the longest and most critically acclaimed run for this character.
Yeah, I definitely read some of these in between after I started rereading comics again. I think somewhere in the early 2000s. I think I read some of this.
Yeah,
some of this series.
It's just not a character that's that popular, and I don't know what they're going to do with it. They've attempted many times because, there was the movie and the series. I think the series lasted longer than I expected. But it's wasn't there a period where so after Crisis killed her off and they rebooted it, it wasn't a clay figure that was just replicating, a lady made out of clay or a mud or something, and she was
an alien.
Okay.
God, I can't remember what her name was, but yeah, she basically was. She could shift forms and stuff like that, and yeah, it's if during the Doomsday thing, she gets hit really hard and basically kind of see that weird kind of goo-like figure that she is.
Yeah, that's the only time I've ever seen the character in that form. It's just and sometimes she's his cousin, sometimes she's not, sometimes she's the only survivor besides him, and sometimes she's not. It's just they can never seem to figure out what to do with her. And it seems like Peter David held on for a pretty long time with, keeping the character consistent and likable.
Well, it's and also, I can't remember if at this time he also had Power Girl running around.
Right, who's also supposed to be his cousin or something. Yeah.
Yeah, who's also effectively the same character.
Yeah, it's really confusing. So we'll see. I don't. They introduced her in the new Flash movie, but I don't know if it'll stick or not because they're already reconfiguring that universe and.
No, the Flash movie basically doesn't exist anymore after this thing. Because it's now all James Gunn stuff. So
yeah, that's another thing to kill it in the theaters. Hey, all you watch here doesn't matter. Oh, and then he announces he has a 4-hour cut that he's gonna put out. They're gonna put out on DVD. I'm like, then don't go see it in theaters. It's fucking a waste of time.
No.
Yeah. All right, we have the end of Sandman. I never read it, but you did, right?
Yes, and the Kindly Ones and The Wake are both phenomenal. The Kindly Ones is a 14-issue storyline that takes everything that has happened in all those issues and creates this, in a comic that's not about fighting, creates one of the most interesting non-fights ever, because there are characters coming after Morpheus for blood.
Yeah.
And you have there's a dream. I'm going to phrase it like this: there's a dream child that's been kidnapped, and we have to send a series. Did you see the series that was on Netflix?
I haven't. No. Is it still going or is it over?
Oh, it ended. I think they might do a second season.
Netflix constantly torturing the fans, man.
Yeah, but you have the serial killing Corinthian, along with the Matthew, his Sandman's Raven, going after this child that they have to protect because it quote unquote belongs to Morpheus, even though it's someone's child who's gunning for Morpheus's blood. And it's just all these plot lines and stuff just finally kind of come together in this thing. And the big part of the beginning of the story, the mission statement is the Lord of Dreams has to learn to change or die. And he dies.
No.
But then he doesn't die because he is this dream child is an aspect of Morpheus. So he becomes a new version of himself. The only thing that has died is a point of view. And we've seen this character actually grow over the course of from issue 1 till issue 70, I think.
Okay.
You actually are seeing a change in this character. And it's like I said, it's an interesting idea of how to do a battle without having to ever have characters throw punches. And you ultimately are given these last couple of issues called The Wake, which it's the funeral for the King of Dreams, which also brings back all the tie-in to it being part of the DC universe. Because you have God, who is it? It's Superman, Batman, and someone else commenting on. Oh shoot! I wish I had reread it because I'm trying to remember what they say. Basically, it's like, have you ever had a dream, but you're being played by someone else?
No.
And Superman and Batman are like, yeah, and then the other person's like, I have no idea what you're talking about because that person didn't have I think it might have been Martian Manhunter, and it's like, doesn't have a version of himself that's ever been presented on screen at that time. But and you're basically watching a funeral go, and it's a wonderfully emotional thing. You're given one more issue with the eternally living medieval peasant Hob as he visits a Ren fair, and he's having a hard time with it because it's nothing like the time period he grew up in. He's sitting there it's way too clean. No one's walking around with horrible tumors on their faces.
Yeah.
And he doesn't want to hear anyone speak to him in really bad, fake English. But he's given a chance to die. Because that's been his entire concept has been, death is a fool's game. I'll never die. And so he makes a deal with the Sandman to basically live forever. Death will never touch him. And Death comes up and says, hey, my brother's dead. Do you want to die, or do you want to keep going?
Do you want to dance? I said, do you want to die?
And basically...
Sorry, I had to.
Yeah, and basically he chooses to live, so he's going to live for his friend. But, it's like, if he ever... There's always that open invitation that if he's finally done, he can be given his final rest. And it's, it's like the last issue is about the Tempest, which Shakespeare only wrote only two original stories are about dreaming, and it's Midsummer Night's Dream and the Tempest. And we saw earlier on in the series that Shakespeare does the Midsummer Night's Dream for all the people that it's about. So he's performing this farce in front of all the fairies. The Tempest is more of just a reflection on basically your life and all, and what it means to be alive and to dream. And it's just kind of like a philosophical way to actually fully end your series. It's really nice.
I can't believe you remembered all that. Have you read it recently?
No, it's been a little while.
Okay.
But I've read that series a lot.
Okay, I was gonna say I have a shit memory for some of this stuff. So, Kingdom Come comes out, and basically makes Alex Ross now a household name. He had been rising for a while, like Marvel's did very well, but this, holy shit, this fucking makes him like a phenomenon. And still had ramifications for years to come, because another thing where DC would incorporate it as best they could into the normal DC universe, like around 2000, I want to say 6, they started incorporating parts of it into Justice Society. And it's a weird, it's kind of a religious book in a way. It's also groundbreaking because it decided to, it just like this idea of what they would be like in the future, this whole epic story about like the next generation of superheroes, but in a different way than we had seen before, because we had like Iron Man 2040 and Hulk Future Imperfect and stuff like that. But I just remember I never felt like something had like this Elseworlds kind of tale had so much weight to it that felt like it was part of the normal universe.
Yeah, it does feel like it is a continuation of all those stories, just, a comic book that fell 20 years from the future, something like that.
Yeah, and not like the same way like the whole 2099. Like that just felt like it was just a goof off. Like there's too much distance, for that to matter. But this one just felt like it's just 20 years from now.
Yeah, it feels like it was just the natural progression of the stories that they told. And yeah, it's such a beautiful work of art. All that stuff in there.
I still cannot get out of my head the scene where Shazam has been taken over and he just keeps hitting Superman with lightning over and over and over. And he has that demonic look, like he can't wait to kill Superman, because in a weird way, Superman has always overshadowed Captain Marvel. And I think he's just kind of always pissed and jealous about it, but never really said it.
And now he has a chance, to take some vengeance for all that.
What's the name of that worm that's in his ear? I can't remember. The little fucking...
Oh God. It's like Mr. Mind.
Yeah, and that's basically what's taking him over. And it kind of... I don't want to say he completely took over Captain Marvel. I feel like he just enhanced the worst parts of him. Which is weird to say because everybody thinks Captain Marvel is purist, but he's still human. He's still a boy who has the emotional, stunted, he hasn't developed, like, nuance and complicated grays in his life.
Yeah, he is a kid who just has all these godlike powers.
Yeah. And, yeah, it's just a phenomenal story. But remember after this, it was just like, every time he turned around, Alex Ross was doing covers. And I think that's kind of slowed him down, though, because he wasn't creating anything. He was doing those giant, though. Remember not the digest. That's small. What's the oversized? What are those called? Those massive. They used to do them. Treasury Edition.
Yeah, there you go.
He did one of, I want to say he did 4 of them. He did Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman. I think he did one of Captain Marvel, and but he only did like one a year, but that's how long it took because he kept getting distracted by these huge paychecks for covers. Remember, he even did like the Oscars, like he did a whole painting for them. It was so strange. Like he was a celebrity artist who was actually good, unlike Rob Liefeld, who was a celebrity as well.
Yeah, it's like there's definitely good. Alex Ross, I can't really think of anything that he, like, art-wise that he's done that I do not like.
Yeah, he never, even his early stuff, like with Terminator burning the Earth, before he really developed his style and had the budget to do it, still pretty good.
Yeah, it's like, there's certain things where it's like, I may not care for the story. I'm not it's like, but if I see an Alex Ross painted, cover, I will at least look at it.
Yeah.
It may not be my favorite thing, but you'll be like, dang.
He's big. Good. He's really big into the golden age of comics, and he did covers and a little bit of minor redesign work for Justice Society, and then he went over to Dynamite, and he's been there for a really long time, like doing like the Shadow and Green Hornet and that whole Superpowers, was it Project Superpowers he worked on forever and ever? Yeah, just redesigning and writing and doing covers for those guys. I've never really got into it because those aren't characters that I know too well. I feel like with Dynamite, I think the art is becoming, the curse of independent comics is more important than the actual writing. With his stuff, I mean.
Yeah, right on. I'm trying to look. I'm looking up some of those things that he's done.
Yeah, I heard Daredevil was his version. No, it's not the death-defying Daredevil because it's a public domain name. But yeah, he took like these old public domain characters, and so he has a big history with like this golden age. So it's kind of interesting that he took on a project like this that not only honors the golden age, but also like develops a whole new age of characters.
Here we go. Those ones, they were Superman, Peace on Earth, Batman, War on Crime,
Yeah.
Shazam, Power of Hope, Wonder Woman, Spirit of Truth, and then JLA, Secret Origins, and Liberty and Justice.
Okay. I remember for April Fool's, Wizard Magazine had him do... I mean, how much money did they pay for this joke? They had him do a Power Twins. That he was gonna do a Treasury edition of the Power Twins, and he did a huge mock-up painting of it, or whatever. And I'm like, that's a lot of money and time for a joke. But we also have Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale coming together for the epic Long Halloween, and it's so interesting to think that Jeff Loeb was so he had 5 hits right in a row. Well, sort of hits. He had Teen Wolf Commando, Burglar, and Teen Wolf 2, and then nothing. Just dry as a desert for years. And then just somehow, I don't know how he ended up in comic books, but just hits the ground running. And if you look at his comics work, it's insane compared to his film work. And that's even including when he started, Marvel started putting him in charge, or DC started putting him in charge of stuff like Smallville and stuff like that. But I just think he's another one of those guys like Judd Winnick, Jeff Johns, whatever, that really got down to the roots of who the characters were and then explore the story. And that's what makes it work so much. If it's just a gimmick, if it's just a plot with no characters to back it up, then who gives a shit?
Yeah, and especially the Long Halloween, that is a hell of a story.
Yeah, and there's a lot of sequels in this universe, but also, like, remember they went over to Marvel and they did like Spider-Man Blue, Daredevil Yellow, and stuff like that. Like him and Tim Sale work so well together at getting these really like enclosed stories that aren't part of the normal universe. They don't have to worry about anything else going on. They just tell the story, and I love that.
Yeah, one thing I will say though is, don't check out. Please do never look at anything that he did for the Ultimate line on Marvel, because that stuff is really bad.
I only read Ultimate Spider-Man. Who wrote that? It was Mark Bagley drawing it.
That was Bendis.
Bendis. That's why it works so well. Okay. Yeah, it's so funny how they just said, "Well, is this in Elseworlds?" Well, it wasn't, right? It was just its own little thing. Like,
it was just a story.
Yeah.
It kind of got folded into, because it exists in like the same world as Batman Year One and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So it's like it's in continuity, but it's also just like kind of one step removed from
right.
continuity.
Well, there's been so many fucking reboots and reconfigurations of that whole universe over and over and over again. I just assume everything is going to be part of it. So
yeah,
except Batman Gotham by Gaslight. And the final thing in the DC universe that I'll talk about is Final Night. The end of Hal Jordan as Green Lantern, Parallax, whatever you want to call that beast, and would eventually become
Spectre.
The Spectre. Thank you. I almost said Sentry, and I had to pause. It was a really good storyline, and I just remember like DC used to do these kind of stories. Like they had the one annual that would spread out to everything,
like Showcase.
Yeah. Well, no. I was talking like 0 Hour and stuff like that, where every single title had to have it. And Final Night was kind of one of those enclosed tales where it was only 4 or 5 issues, and it just very clean, no complications. And at the end of it, you had this beautiful sacrifice. Hal Jordan trying to fight as hard as he can against Parallax. and saves the universe because the sun is being eaten. I think by the Star Eater or something like that.
Something like that.
Yeah, and it's just and Superman could not do anything because he's powered by the sun, and he's the only other guy that could have possibly had the power to take out this creature.
Well, it's like I'm still trying to think if I've actually read the story. I genuinely don't know if I've ever read it. I know it because Kevin Smith uses it as the basis for his return of Oliver Queen.
Right. There's a speck. There's a speck of Green Arrow on Green Lantern's costume. No, not Green Lantern. Superman.
On Superman's costume. Yeah. Because prior to this, he had Oliver Queen sacrificed himself by blowing something up, and apparently Hal Jordan as the Spectre took a little piece of Ollie Quinn and then used it to resurrect him.
And it's not. And there's no big names really on this. Just consistent creators that always did good stuff. Carl Kessel and Stuart Immonen. He does the art of that. I like that guy's work. Yeah, I think Carl Kessel was mostly known for a Superman kind of universe kind of guy. But I thought it was a good story. If you find it cheap, I would check it out.
Okay, that's very possible.
All right, so over in the independent world, look. They never really said it as far as I know, but I know Robot Chicken is based off this. But Wizard Magazine launches Twisted Toy Fair Theater.
Oh yes, I remember those.
I want to say I think it was a few segments in Wizard, but then it went over to Toy Fair, which all of a sudden because of all these newer companies coming in like McFarlane, so they're doing higher end toys. That started a whole new thing for them. They were doing articles on new toy lines, and they would have a price guide in the back of that, like the way they did with comic books. And they always had this little segment that made me fucking crack up. I even went and bought all the collections. Like, they would get all the Twisted Mego Theater, whatever, together in a big book.
It's definitely one of the things that I remember, even if I wasn't really looking at comics at the time, you'd see that on, a magazine spinner, and I'd pick it up and at least flip through it to see... just at least look at those.
Yeah. Me and my friend Joey, when it was fall of 2003, early 2004, we were talking about it because we read it at work during the downtimes. And we're like, we should turn this into a stop motion animation kind of short. We were coming up with ideas and stuff like that. We had the action figures to do it with because he had a huge toy collection. And we stalled so long, and by the time we finally started writing the scripts, Robot Chicken debuted. Shit.
But 100%. That has to be where they got it from.
Yeah. I think even one of the main guys from Toy Fair went over, and he's a main writer on that. So, I already mentioned barbed wire. So the last thing I'll say is the Darkness debuts, and I remember this being such a phenomenon with my friends. And I think it made the cover of Wizard a few times, and it was a big deal and no one talks about it. That or Witchblade. I don't think either one are around anymore.
No.
Horror comics it had this boom in the late 90s.
What's funny is they did make 2 games based off of the Darkness, and there was a Witchblade anime.
Yeah, well, there's the Witchblade TV show too.
Yeah, there was a brief moment where those Top Cow properties were actually big deals.
Yeah, I wonder if I didn't even look it up. I don't know if Top Cow was around. Was that Mark Silvestri, right?
Yes.
He did, because his was Cyberforce, but then that started to peter out. I think he got bored of the 2, and then all of a sudden Witchblade became a huge thing. But that wasn't his either. He didn't draw it. It was David Worth or something like that. I can't remember. But then that and the Darkness. Yeah, I remember they were just huge for a few years. There was a time, kids, when Image Comics. And it wasn't anything created by Robert Kirkman that actually got word of mouth around, and people were excited about Cliffhanger and stuff like that. And it's such a unique time. I think people saw the blood in the water was there for the major companies because they just didn't know what the fuck they were doing anymore. And I think people just got burnt out and they wanted whole new universes. But consistency was the problem with these independent comics.
Yeah, I was thinking about it, and there was one series that I don't think we've ever mentioned, but looking it up, it's Strangers in Paradise. which had debuted in '93, actually, did actually have something. It did go to Image for 8 issues during starting in '96.
Yeah. There's some guys who would take their stuff over for a while and then realize, nah, this doesn't work for me, and then go somewhere else, or they would just shut down.
Yeah, which I'll say this, I think I know exactly which one it is, because that's like they started off by basically going into the Image Comics house style for a brief thing, and it ended up being like a dream sequence where the characters, look like they are just, the big tits, big guns, type comic book.
Well, if I remember, Mage is one of those where, like, the first series of Mage was like Dark Horse or something even earlier than that, and then Matt Wagner's series, and then it went over to Image for the last 2 runs. And then some people just like bouncing it out because it gives you the ability to have a publisher, have creative control. I think what bothers a lot of creators is, first off, there's nobody breathing over their shoulder to keep them going, and 2, they have to do all the promotion. That's their responsibility, but they're too busy creating the comics. They don't have time to go around doing that for, so they need a company, someone bigger to do that for them. That's why Dark Horse keeps chugging along, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it just, Image, do people still talk about Image? I think even Kirkman has left Image. I saw that he started his own company and he picked up the G.I. Joe and the Transformers contracts.
Well, I'll say this. I think Image is really being held together by Saga. I mean, there's definitely... I'm pulling up a list right now of like stuff that's coming out for Image.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Briefly, where are we?
But if you think about it, I feel like this last 2 years or so has really hit independent comics right in the dick. Because there's too many companies. There's too many licenses that cost too much money that aren't connecting, and then the independent stuff that's unique, that has a voice of its own, is getting buried. And only a few things get out, like Lumberjanes, that stuff. But Oni Press is on the ropes. Basically, all the companies in Portland are on the ropes. I mean, I didn't know Image Comics moved to Portland too. So you have Dark Horse, Oni Press. There's a couple others up there where it's just like they're letting the people go like crazy because they can't keep up.
It's like Monstrous is still going really strong for them. They got Spawn back. Walking Dead, there's like a new thing of Walking Dead stuff.
Oh God, just let that go.
And definitely Saga. Saga is one of their that's the one that's been really holding the torch. I Hate Fairyland is a good one that Image has currently.
Dude, I am on Image right now, and I can't believe what I'm reading. Battle Chasers is back with a vengeance. A new story arc and reprints of the original. Cyberforce is looking to relaunch. They're reprinting old Megaton comics. They do have a huge catalog of stuff from the past they could put in trade paperback to get people interested again. I think the only thing still going is Savage Dragon and Spawn. I didn't even see Savage Dragon on their header here. That's crazy. That's one of the original.
Savage Dragon is still going around.
Yeah, still chugging along. It's just so interesting where they started and where they are now. Because DC and Marvel have always tried to keep all their original characters going. But when all these characters are owned by different people and they can decide to shut it down or sell it off, it's totally different.
Yeah, that's that is the rub of it, isn't it?
Yeah. All right, so we have most definitely gone past an hour. I am pooped. I'm an old man. Let me get on my rocker. Give my Metamucil! Back in my day. I love it when people bitch about comics now. Like, I gotta keep changing all these characters and doing all these things. It's like, dude, we've already been through that. That's what the whole 0 hour was for us. So don't complain. It just happens. I think it even happened in the 70s too. It's like, hey, Wonder Woman doesn't have powers now. Now she works as a model.
Well, she was doing kung fu. Come on.
All right, that is it. Anything you want to plug before you go?
Nothing at the moment, but there is a couple of podcasts or a new podcast in the works for me.
Ooh, what's it about?
It's effectively like the old fireside chats my friend who's been on the show, Johnny, and I used to have. we are in talks to start. I don't know if we're going to post this first one, but I'm gonna try and win him back over to the light side of the Force on Star Wars Episode 8.
Oh, okay. Wait, which one is that one? Is that the
Last Jedi?
Last Jedi. Oh yeah, that's my.
That
might be my favorite one.
That film.
What's that?
He's one of the people that definitely hates that film, and I think I can win him over. Maybe not to loving the film, but at least not hating it.
That'd be an interesting topic because we stopped doing trash cinema a couple years ago. It'd be interesting if you guys talked about movies that either flopped or were hated or whatever, and revisit them and see how that goes. Like 47 Ronin at the time was hated. It was a massive flop, and now all of a sudden everybody's coming around on it. It's kind of interesting how time works like that.
It's always strange how everything gets to recontextualization on all sorts of stuff.
Or what age you were. Like, look, I saw Howard the Duck like 50 times as a kid, but as an adult, it's hard to get through. But man, my co-host Jacob on the movie, most of the movie discussions, he loves it. He loves so many of these movies that I'm like, oh no. This revisiting of the old Super Mario Brothers movies is very strange to me.
Yeah, well, I think it's also I genuinely would love. I think we're going to talk about another podcast now. That how not to make a movie. I still would like Al Katz to get the guy who directed Hellraiser Bloodlines on.
Yeah,
that's a film. I
really thought that's what his show was going to be. Is he said to us that he was going to get other directors to come on and talk about movies that haven't gone well for them, and it hasn't happened yet. And I'm kind of bummed.
Yeah, that is a shame. But,
it feels like he's milking the Tales from the Crypt thing too long.
Well, that is kind of the world he's in is all those people.
I guess, but I mean, at some point you got to exhaust what you're talking about, and it's called How Not to Make a Movie. Get other directors and actors and whatever writers on to talk about things that have gone completely different directions of how they intended to be.
Yeah, as I said, I think, like I said, Hellraiser 4 has kind of gotten a little bit of a reevaluation.
Well, if Curse of Michael Myers can have a it helps that there's a new cut of it. But that'd be an interesting thing for you guys to do. Yeah, just let me know. And why are we still talking about this on the air? Shit. Hey, guys, we should go. Bye.
See ya.